That's what I'm talking about.
Wait! Okay, now, from the beginning.
Welcome to BS, Beyond Stereotypes, a podcast about lawyers using their authentic voices to change the world.
For me, it doesn't matter, if I'm in big law or work in a major consulting firm or go to an Ivy League school. I've got a set of issues that I'm passionate about that kind of are important to me and my soul, that give my life meaning and purpose. And I gotta, commit myself to moving the ball up the field on those issues, regardless of where I'm at.
Welcome to BS, Beyond Stereotypes. I'm your host, Merle Vaughn. Here to BS with me today is George Fatheree, whose story I find fascinating and who will no doubt inspire all of you to embrace your authenticity. George is a real estate partner at a major law firm in Los Angeles called Sidley. He attended Harvard undergrad, and before going to law school was named to the top 25 minority entrepreneurs. George received his JD at Loyola Law School. In 2020 was named Attorney of the Year by the Daily Journal for work representing the Getty Trust, acquiring the Ebony and Jet photographs that we've all heard about. He has been selected for inclusion in Chambers as well as a top lawyer in his field. A lot of you know about something major that George has done recently, which is to get Bruce Beach back for the Black family from whom it was taken probably decades ago. And we applaud that. We'll spend just a little time talking about that. But more importantly, George is a father, friend, and an awesome guy. So let's jump right in. I'd like to start by giving folks an idea of your origination story, how it all started and to get where you are and where you're from, and maybe a little idea of your upbringing, if you don't mind.
Sure, Merle. Happy to talk about that. So my folks met at UC Irvine. I think my father, who's Black, was one of the first Black classes at UC Irvine. My mother, who's white, transferred there from a Christian college. They met, and my mom got pregnant. They both dropped out of college.
Wow.
And they had me. They had two other children, and when I was about 4.5, my sister was 2 and my baby brother was 1. My dad left.
Oh.
And so I was raised by a single mom, 3 kids. I grew up in a town called Chino, California. It's about an hour southeast of Los Angeles. It's part of San Bernardino County or the Inland Empire. And when I was growing up in Chino, it was, there were more cows than people in Chino. There were really only 2 things of note in our town. It was one of the largest state prisons in California, is the California Institute for Men, and that's in Chino. And the other thing were dairy farms. So growing up, most of the people I knew, their dads either were dairy farmers or prison guards. So it was I don't know, I'd say not quite middle class, definitely a working class upbringing in Chino. I went to public school, K through 12, graduated from Chino High School, and I was a motivated young person. As early as I could remember, I signed up for everything. I wanted to be involved in everything. I volunteered a lot. I was an altar boy. I was in 4-H. I was school president. I was captain of the varsity soccer team.
Wow.
I umpired Little League. I worked at a restaurant. Like I've always, I've probably always been terrified of having free time or idle time. So worked
Why
really
did you
hard.
think you might end up at the prison if you had idle time?
Probably. And so yeah, so that's where I grew up.
Interesting. And so, you mentioned Chino. Most people probably know Chino from Snoop, right? From his
Yeah,
that Snoop's raps about Chino.
yeah.
But
He's got a line. He says, "I'm on my way to Chino, rolling in the Grey Goose," talking about the prison bus heading out there. So, but now, shoot, Snoop now lives in the hills, Chino Hills, which is like, that's fancy Chino Hills. But when we were growing up, Chino Hills didn't exist. It was just the kind of hills over there.
interesting. Okay. And so yeah, one of my questions usually is what makes you unique. It sounds like that idea that you always had to be busy and always had to is that one of the things that you feel makes you unique? What else do you think makes you unique?
So, look, I think I'm really fortunate. I've managed to, somewhat successfully marry my passion for, look, I get a passion for, for Black people. I love Black
Right.
people. I love Black culture. I love kind of uplifting. I love Black excellence. I love Black self-determination and socioeconomic advancement. And I've been able to marry that like passion with my professional training and experience, which I started off professionally. I was a strategy consultant for Booz Allen and then McKinsey and Company. You alluded to I got experience as an entrepreneur. I worked for several years as a nonprofit executive working in public education reform, and now for the past 16 years I've been a corporate attorney. And so collectively, those experiences have helped me develop a set of skills that I've been again able to marry with my passion, and you know the intersection of those two things, I think, gives me a real sense of purpose in my life, and it's something that I'm have immense gratitude for.
And so were there very many Black kids in Chino when you were growing up?
I grew up mostly in, like I said, kind of a lower working class white and Latino neighborhood. There were, a large kind of Mexican American population. My high school, didn't have a lot of Black kids. There were actually, kind of when I was going to high school at Chino High School, kind of pretty high racial tensions between the Black kids and the Mexican kids. And I think, basically everybody wanted to kick my butt because I'm half Black, but I spoke Spanish and looked Mexican. And so it was hard for me to find kind of real, community there. And so that wasn't a part of my life growing up in Chino. And I would say it wasn't really until I got into college that I started experiencing and really, celebrating that part of my identity.
Interesting. Yeah. I mean, I picked up on that because I can understand how that would be, it could be confusing, being raised by a white mom in a Hispanic neighborhood and to ultimately end up having a passion for Black folks. It's like almost a full circle thing for you.
I think that's right.
So that being said, so you've already kind of touched on, stereotypes, right? Because of your mixed heritage and your desire to and your ability to speak languages and all that. What kind of stereotypes do you feel people have made about you, and were they right or wrong?
I this is something that I didn't realize for a long time. And I remember one time after I think it was a work dinner, and I got in the car and my wife looked at me and she said, you gotta let people know kind of where you're from. You gotta let people know you're from Chino because I think people see and experience you now, and they think that you were, kind of, born into this, and that this was
Silver
like,
spoon.
yeah, that this was like a predestined outcome, that you are now a partner at a top law firm and have this great practice. And she goes, I don't think people appreciate how hard you've had to work and hustle. She said, I got a couple nice suits and some fancy reading glasses. And I think people have assumptions about, and you work, you go to an Ivy League school and you work at a big firm. And I think people do develop, have assumptions on how you came up. And, and I think for me, but most of the time those assumptions are erroneous. Like I said, I didn't know my father growing up. Neither of my parents finished college. I was the first of my family to go to college. I was the first kid in my high school to go to Harvard.
Mm.
And I've basically since I was probably 9 or 10 years old, like I've worked and hustled every day of my life. And I think that I don't know if that always comes across.
And I totally get that. And I've I've had a similar situation. Although both my parents were together and they were school teachers, we lived in Compton because they taught in the Compton School District.
I
And
see.
so they felt like, you live where you teach. And I went to Dominguez High School. Um, and it was a rough experience. And I've lived both sides of this life. And for one, I agree with your wife. I do not miss any opportunity to tell people that I'm from Compton because one, I'm proud of it, but two, it does inform, a lot about, the experience and the journey.
Yeah, and what you had to go through to get here. I'll share, Merle. I don't talk about this a lot, but I'll share something like, so I've got like the oldest memory I've got of my father. He had left my mom with three kids when we were all young. I do have a memory of being in kindergarten or maybe first grade, and him and getting called to the office with and my siblings there were at the same school, but in the preschool. And I remember getting called to the office, and my dad was in the office, and they said, do you know this man? I said, yeah. I said, that's my dad, because I guess my mom had asked him to kind of pick us up, or he was going to check us out to school, but he wasn't known to the school.
Right.
So I remember they took the word of a 5-year-old to hand over myself and my, like I said, my 3-year-old sister and probably 2-year-old brother. And we go outside the school, and he didn't have a car. And so he had a shopping cart from like the grocery store around the corner, that he had grabbed a shopping cart because that's how he was going to like transport the three of us to get on the bus. I remember an argument with him and the bus driver where the bus driver wouldn't let him put the shopping cart on the bus. And so he was saying, well, how am I supposed to get these kids? And I remember him trying to take us to grab something to eat at like a fast food restaurant and not having enough money to like buy, to like kind of pay for all of
Wow.
us. So it's like, that's really my earliest memory. And I think that like that image and that, kind of being in that situation, I think it's motivated me, and I think it drives me.
Right. I mean, I can't see how it wouldn't. I mean, but it could. It could either things can go either way. I mean, what that did for you is create your resilience, right? You probably said at the time, "I'm not gonna be that," and you stuck to it. You could have just as easily just felt defeated.
Yeah, I think that's right. I remember showing up in college, and look, college was a shock for me for a bunch of reasons. Like I had never been to a city, right? I mean,
Wow.
Chino's more farm than streets. I think I had been on a bus once to Los Angeles to visit like the La Brea tar pits or something, but I had never been to a city. So you show up in Cambridge, it's a real city. There's taxis and a subway and buildings, and so that was disorienting. I had never experienced weather like that, so that was kind of a shock.
Right.
The racial kind of dynamics at Harvard are, I think, kind of complicated to figure out how to navigate, to say the least. But more than all of those, the thing that was most shocking to me was the wealth. I
Mm-hmm.
had never been around anybody that had that kind of money. And I remember one of the very first conversations I had with one of my new classmates. We shared a taxi from the airport to campus together. And this was a very well kind of put together young woman, kind of hair and bag and dress and speech and everything. And I remember she spoke the whole taxi ride to the square. And when we finally got out, she looked at me. She said, "Oh my goodness, I'm so embarrassed. I've been talking this whole time. I haven't asked you anything about yourself." She goes, "Tell me, where does your family summer?" That was her. That was her question to me, and I was like,
Oh,
like I'd never heard the word summer used as a verb, right? And so I was like, the Chino YMCA, like, what are you talking about? So that all of those things took a lot to get adjusted to.
wow. But you clearly adjusted to it. At what point did you decide to go to law school?
So let's see. I took a bunch of time off between undergrad and law school. Like I said, I worked as a consultant. Um, we started a family, and I think you know this, Merle. Merle, I think we've talked about this. But when our first son was born, when he was an infant, he developed a very rare neurological disorder where he
Yes.
basically would have nonstop seizures. Sometimes he'd have 180 to 200 seizures a day. As a result, we ended up spending a bunch of time in the hospital, which made it hard for me to continue my work as a consultant. I think it made it hard, both in terms of that lifestyle. Like I'd get on a plane Sunday night and fly back into town on Thursday or Friday. So I think I had to be around and in town. But look, also, if I'm honest with myself, I think it wasn't just the lifestyle. I think when you have some crisis like that in your life, it
Hmm.
also really forced me to evaluate how I was using my time and my talents professionally,
And with whom, right?
and with whom and for what.
Hmm.
And so at that point, I decided to pivot, and I left the private sector and I went to go work in public education reform. And why public education reform? Because two things. One, that to me that was a key to kind of help drive my passion that I have for uplifting Black people. And I saw how a bunch of Black folks get shortchanged by the public education system. And then, if I'm honest, like, public education is the only thing that got me out of Chino.
Yeah.
Right? I had a handful of super strong, dedicated, motivated public school teachers who saw something in me and pushed me and encouraged me. And that's what let me get out of there. And so I went to work in public education reform. And at the same time, I was leaving the private sector to go do that. I thought, I really ought to get some degree just so that my development continues.
Hmm.
And at that point, I decided to go back to law school.
Got it. Got it. And you didn't consider moving, I mean, staying on the East Coast where you like got to get back to LA.
Yeah, no, look, my family's here, and this is home for me. This is where I was comfortable, um, and so I always knew at some point I'd be back in LA, and as far as I was concerned, sooner sooner was better than later,
Right? Especially after a few of those winners, right?
all day.
So why real estate law? I know you characterize yourself as a corporate lawyer, which I understand is also, it's deals and transactions, but specifically, how did you end up in real estate?
Yeah, yeah, great question. And look, it was really only recently. And when I say that, I've been practicing law for 16 years now. And I think, Merle, it was really only in the last 6 months, and really in connection with some of the pro bono work I was doing that I think we're going to talk about,
Right.
that finally made me understand why I had become a real estate attorney. So So look, when I went to law school, and I went to law school at night. So I worked full time during the day, helping to run the nonprofit. I would leave the office at about 5:45, get to class from 6. I took class from 6 to 10, 4 nights a week, and would study on the weekend. So it's a 4-year program. And when I never had any intention of going into a big firm, right? I was very passionate about the work I was doing. And probably a year before graduation, I got some advice from the dean of the law school. He asked me what I was going to do after graduation, and I told him, I said, I'm doing it. I'm trying to, create, better educational opportunities for Black and Brown kids.
Mm-hmm.
And what he said is, he said, look, he said, that's fantastic. He said, if you don't go to a firm, at least for a couple of years, like it's really, folks really don't take you seriously
Seriously.
with your
Mm-hmm.
JD. So he really encouraged me, and look, and I trusted his opinion. And so, I asked him, I said, well, where do you think I should go? And he goes, that's easy. If you only want to do it for 2 years, go to Skadden, because 2 years at Skadden is like 3 or 4 years anywhere else. And so that's where I went. And when I came in, I knew I wanted to do litigation. And I knew I wanted to do litigation because that's really the only thing that I knew.
Mm-hmm.
My best friend from college was a litigator. Kind of that's what they teach you when you're in law school is, it's cases and litigation. And so I came out, and, that's all I wanted to do. My very first litigation assignment involved a real estate question. And the litigator who gave me the assignment, they said, look, before you start doing the research, why don't you go talk to this partner who's in the real estate group? He may have some information that kind of helps you focus the research. And so I remember going upstairs and meeting this guy, and it was love at first sight, right? This was somebody who had like my same energy, my
Mm.
same passion for, progressive politics and social justice. And I think what struck me was, look, if I'm going to do this work and I'm going to work this hard, like I want to do it with somebody I love. I want to do it with somebody who I can see myself being when I get there. And so I became a real estate attorney, like
Wow.
really for no reason other than I felt like a strong connection with this guy. And honestly, Merle, it wasn't until I got involved with the Bruce's Beach case that I remember, getting home one night and kind of sitting down, and it just struck me, and it finally said, like, George, this is why you became a real estate attorney.
Well,
Um,
because it all came together, right? It all culminated in that experience.
that's exactly right. And look, I'll tell you, like that's really how I feel about my career. I feel like my career, and I want to be clear, it didn't accidentally come together. It didn't coincidentally come together. Like I've been intentional and deliberate about wanting to be an excellent transactional corporate real estate attorney, with the idea of like developing those skills and reaching a level of excellence to be able to use that and to use the firm platform and the network and the intellectual capital to really support issues, causes, organizations, movements that are important to me and my family.
And you've been fortunate that you've been at firms that have allowed you to do that as well.
Absolutely.
So how do you find these things? Like, for example, I alluded to the Ebony and Jet photographs. I mean, that's a big deal. And then to go from that, I'm sure there are some cool things in between. And then the Bruce's Beach pro bono work, which is I mean groundbreaking. But well, first tell me how you find these opportunities, and then I have another question for you.
Look, I mean, I think it goes back to the point I was trying to make about intentionality. I mean, you hear people say, right place at the right time, and that's definitely true. I've been at the right place at the right time, but I've also been there with the right skills, with the right experience, with the right intentionality and passion. And so again, I do think some of this is the universe lining up around me. But I also think, like you said, I've been blessed and fortunate to be at firms and companies that have not just indulged my passion for issues related to racial justice and giving back and equality, but have encouraged, supported, and celebrated it. So I think it's, right place at the right time with the right skills and the right intention.
Okay, so tell us a little bit. We won't talk all because I'm sure you've got to be, exhausted about being interviewed about Bruce Beach, and that's not what this interview is about. But tell our audience a little bit about what that is. My impression of it is that it's probably the first true reparations for Black folks in the U.S., which I applaud you. Thank you so much for doing that. But give us some background on that and kind of tell us a little bit about the process and where it ended, how it started and where it ended.
Sure. So just, super quickly for folks who aren't familiar with the story, Willa and Charles Bruce were an entrepreneurial Black couple who in 1912 bought a parcel of really beachfront property in what is now the city of Manhattan Beach. They started with just a stand that you could buy a sandwich and a soda, and then they added a tent and rented bathing suits, where basically Black people from all over LA County would hop on the red line, hop on the train, come to their spot, change, buy a sandwich, and use and enjoy the beach. It was very popular. It was very successful, and it grew. And Willa and Charles ended up buying another parcel. They ended up building a 2-story building, and as a result, this really became, this spot, right? It's kind of like we think of maybe, Martha's Vineyard now, or the Inkwell, or
Right.
Oak Bluff. Like, this was the spot. Of course, not everybody was as excited as you and I, would be about the success of the resort. And what you had was some of the community members in Manhattan Beach starting to make noise about what they referred to as the Negro invasion.
Mm,
All these Black people coming into town, using the beach. And I'll tell you, Merle, one of the things that I learned when I was doing the research is it wasn't just that there were Black people coming to Manhattan Beach using the beach. It was that some of the people that were coming were wealthy Black people. They would show up and they'd have a car and they'd have a driver and they would have their trunks of clothes, and they ended up buying real estate and building homes. And I think it's that really caused kind of the, that led to the agitation. So anyways, fast forward,
wow.
the white neighbors engaged in a series of harassments, and they would slash the tires. They put up kind of fences so you kind of get to the beach. At one point, somebody tried to shove a mattress under the building and set it on fire. They burned a cross across the street. And even with all that, the resort continued to grow in popularity. And so,
Right.
so finally, around the 1920s, there was a real estate agent who hatched a scheme to use eminent domain to take the property.
Mm,
And what they said was, we need to build a city park. And it's crazy. You look at photographs of what Manhattan Beach looked like at the time, and you've got Bruce's Beach, which is kind of there in the middle, and then all around it's just sand, and it's
right.
vacant lot, and it's dirt. But of course, where did the park need to go?
Right on Bruce's
Right on
Beach.
it, right where the building is. So in 1924, the property was turned over to the city. The city immediately demolished the building.
Mm,
And at the same hearing, the city passed a number of ordinances that made it illegal to set up a business on the beach without getting a city permit. They wanted to make sure that the Bruces wouldn't just set up shop down the beach. So that happened almost 100 years ago. And how I got involved is, I've got a good friend who had heard about my work with Johnson Publishing Company and the Jet and Ebony Photography Archive.
mm-hmm.
And she reached out to me. She said, "Hey, I'm going to send you an article. I want you to read the article, and then I'm going to come over and I want to talk to you about it." And she sent me an article about what happened to the Bruces in the 1920s. And I remember reading it, and I remember becoming furious.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, we all know this stuff happens, but in this case, like, the racial motivation was so blatant. It was so,
Blaring.
honest-faced. I think the other thing that struck me when I read this was, this didn't happen in the Deep South in the 1800s, right? This happened in Los Angeles County in 1924.
Right.
And so I remember reading the article, being very moved by it and thinking, I want to do something about this. This is something I want to be involved with. I spent the next several months researching different, legal strategies that maybe could be brought by the family descendants to recover the property, and I think came up with some very, kind of creative and promising angles. But at the end of the day, here's what I was worried about. At the end of the day, I was worried about making contact with the family and getting their hopes up for something that I was not 100% sure I could deliver on.
Right.
And so I kind of sat tight. Um, Fast forward to May 2020, and George Floyd is murdered. And
Mm.
in the aftermath of his murder, which everyone around the world watched for 8 minutes, there was a real, a white hot, a white hot light that was put on issues of racial injustice and racial equity. And it was, in the aftermath of that an amazing community organizer, Kavan Ward, started raising awareness about what had happened to the Bruces. Eventually, the story made its way to Supervisor Janice Hahn, who made the courageous decision that the county should give the land back.
Mm.
Once I heard that, I had two reactions. My first reaction was like, hallelujah, this is
Right.
amazing. Thank goodness. My second reaction was, oh my gosh, um, this has got to be done exactly right. There's going to be a lot of people that don't want to see this happen. There's going to
Right.
be a lot of people who try to stop this. There's going to be lawsuits. And this has also got to be done exactly right because it's never been done before. And if we get it right, it can be a model. If we screw it up, people are going to use it as an excuse to say that's why we can't do this. That's why we can't engage in reparations.
Right. Well, you're setting precedent.
That's exactly right. And so once I realized that this was going to happen and it had to be done exactly right, and I apologize that this is not, this is not going to come off, in a modest way. But what I thought was like, I'm the exact right person to do this. I have to be involved. Like and it's at that moment that I realized that this is something I've been preparing my entire life, and I've been training for my entire professional career to be of service to this family in this kind of landmark event of returning real property to a Black family from whom it had been wrongfully taken.
I'm gonna cry. Don't make me cry.
It's
Oh my
tears
God.
of joy, tears of joy.
Yes, yes, yes. And for our audience's purposes, is this considered reparations?
Yeah, yeah. This is to our knowledge, this is actually the first land reparation to African Americans in this family, right? Or I'm sorry, in this country, the first land reparations. I think there's some evidence and experience of other types of reparative programs, college scholarships and housing priority. But in terms of returning land that was wrongfully taken to a Black family, as far as we know, this is the first time it's happened in the country, and our whole purpose of getting involved was to try to make sure that it's not the last.
Wow. That's amazing. And how many family members, I mean, how do you track those people down and how do you know that you got them all and all
Yeah.
that?
So you had mentioned, I think you made the comment, there's no precedent for this, and that's
Right.
exactly right. And as lawyers, right, that's how we work. We work based on litigation precedent, case precedent, deal precedent, and so this had never been done. And so this transaction brought together a diverse set of legal issues and challenges that had never been, kind of put in a crucible like this before. And so we really did not have a playbook. I've never, look, I've worked on a lot of complex transactions, corporate transactions, real estate transactions, cultural transactions. but nothing that combined the elements here. One of the first things I did when I got hired here is I hired a genealogist to run a family tree, right? I wanted to make sure that we were representing the right folks and that we didn't spend, 6, 12 months negotiating a deal and structuring this. And at the last minute, somebody would show up and say, hey, wait a minute, I'm a family descendant
Exactly.
and I want to, right? So we hired, like a well-known genealogist to kind of do the family tree. This case for me involved drafting legislation, right? Had never done that before, but we worked with State Senator Stephen Bradford's office, who had introduced a bill to that would enable the county to return the property. And we had to do a bunch of legal research to think about, how's somebody going to attack this? If they bring a lawsuit, what are they going to say? And how do we need to strengthen the language in this bill to show the state legislature's intent? Probably one of the most complicated aspects of this are the tax implications.
Right.
Again, this had never happened before. Our government's never given real property back to Black people who lost it in violation of their civil and human rights 100 years ago. And so how's that treated for tax purposes? Do they have to pay income taxes? We're still negotiating those issues. There were obviously real estate issues. How do you get a title insurance policy? How do you get a title insurance company to get comfortable providing an owner's title policy for a piece of land that was taken via eminent domain, is subject to litigation? There may be other descendants. So, our team, and I do want to be clear, I had the honor and the privilege of leading the team, but we had a team of 20 attorneys from around the country who were dedicating their pro bono time to work on this and get this right. And so, our team dealt with numerous issues that were complex and nuanced in and of themselves. And then when combined in this, in this way, it's really something that's never been dealt with before. And I think throughout the process, we tried to stay keenly focused on that. We wanted to make sure that even if we knew what the answer would be or knew what it should be, we wanted to go through the processes so that other folks could use this and follow it as a model. We were kind of creating a playbook as we went.
Wow. So back to, that is like almost fairy tale stuff. It's the kind of stuff that, people dream of going to law school for and having having happened in their life, and you've actually lived it, and thank you from the bottom of my heart for doing that. So how would you encourage other associates of color, younger folks getting into big law, who, it's not for the faint of heart. How do you encourage them and mentor them to make it through to partner?
Look, so for me, it starts with this idea of professional excellence. I had a mentor. I had a mentor who, he reminded me, like, we've got to be twice as good, right?
Right.
We got to be the first ones in, the last ones out. It's funny. What he used to say is, he's like, I got good news and bad news. The bad news is, it's true what they say. You've got to be twice as good as the other guys. He goes, look, the good news is it's not that hard because they're not all that good. But
Mediocrity, right?
yeah, right. But look, for me, it really starts and stops with professional excellence. We've got to show up, and we've got to work harder. We've got to, be better. We're starting from maybe not the same spot, so we've got further to go. And I think a lot of us talk about that we've got to work harder, we've got to be better. I think what I want to add to that is, we also need to allow ourselves the grace when we fall short of that, right? When we don't quite hit that expectation, when we're not performing, to the best of our capabilities. We've got to give ourselves grace, and we've got to allow ourselves to learn from those moments and kind of recoup and take another swing. So for me, it really starts with professional excellence. I've got, for the things that I'm passionate about, for the issues that I want to move the needle on, I've got an obligation to get amazing experience and training so that I can be the best in delivering those solutions. So it starts with excellence, professional excellence, and then the other piece is, and this is, this is why I'm excited to talk on this podcast, is it's about authenticity,
Yep.
right? And it's about being true to yourself. And like, no matter how I slice it, I can't avoid the fact that, right, that I grew up in Chino, California. I'm a kid from Chino, and that's, and that shaped me in terms of who I am, and it shaped me in terms of, who I'm always going to be. And the kind of values that I developed through the experiences I had there are the values that guide and shape my decisions. And so the authenticity is, for me, it doesn't matter, if I'm in big law or work in a major consulting firm or go to an Ivy League school. I've got a set of issues that I'm passionate about that kind of are important to me and my soul, that give my life meaning and purpose. And I gotta, commit myself to moving the ball up the field on those issues, regardless of where I'm at.
Right.
And I think, the way it comes together in my mind is it's right. It's symbiotic. It's complementary. I'm going to do amazing work on the real estate and corporate and transactional paying client side to, develop my network, build my reputation, develop skills, lift my standing within the firm, to be able then to use all of those assets and that goodwill and that equity to advance the issues that are important to me and my family.
Here, here. And these are tremendously stressful times. It's very stressful times for everyone. I mean, you to me exemplify, someone who has had to manage, stress throughout your life and your career. You talked a little bit about your son's health issues. You're a great husband and a great father, and what words of encouragement or advice can you give to folks who find themselves just like overwhelmed with stress right now?
Gosh, I had this talk with my kid. I've got a 16-year-old kid, and that's a rough age. That's a rough time for them. They're dealing with a bunch of stuff that like we didn't have to deal with when we were
Yep.
in high school. So it's a stressful time for them, and I think it's hard to be positive, and it's hard to be happy, and it's hard to always celebrate and be in a great mood. And so the talk that I recently had with them was like, I think one of the most rebellious and courageous acts and actions that we can have as Black people is joy,
Yeah,
right?
right.
Is celebration. And I think it's like, and it's in our DNA, right?
Yep.
Look historically, like what our ancestors, what they dealt with, and they were a burdened people, but they were a joyful people. And so, you said this, this line of work is not for the faint at heart.
Hmm.
But I think what motivates me is that idea of joy as an expression, a joy as a radical expression of Blackness,
Yep.
right? And really kind of like the expression of Blackness as its highest form is joy, kind of notwithstanding, how much we've got to hustle, how much, the cards aren't dealt, to the right hands for us. And so that's a theme that I try to keep, and I can't say I always keep it, but I try to keep it in the front of mind.
Well, and it's interesting you say that because all through the pandemic, what I've been telling people is I'm seeking joy. I am just trying to hang on to something that I can find joyful. And part of it for me is like color. Like people comment every time I show up on a video or in person someplace, somebody comments on how colorful my
Yeah,
outfit is or something. Well, that goes to my something that I'm sure I inherited, through my pat through past people, but it's just something that I do and it makes me happy.
yeah. It's, look, we talked during the pandemic, and especially after, the events in May 2020, we talked a lot about self-care, about Black self-care. And for me, right, joy is a critical ingredient in my self-care. And so look, I try to be around people I love. I try to see friends. I try to kind of find beauty in art and music and food. And I try to experience and express, and to the extent that I'm capable, be a source of joy to others in my life.
So, George, I guess we're kind of, I hate to say this, but we're at the end of our time. I've so enjoyed hearing your story and talking with you. Do you want to give us like one final tidbit, one final thought about encouraging folks to embrace their authenticity and, make it a good one?
Look, for me, it's just been, it's not, don't let people force you into a false decision of having to choose between like your professional excellence or what you're passionate about in your personal life, right? Like that's a false choice.
Yeah.
I want to do both. And not only do I want to do both, I want to use one to make the other one better. And I want to use the other one to make the first one better. And so, what I guess what I want to say is go get it all, right? Go get it all. Excellence, authenticity, intentionality. When you can bring those things together in my life, it's given me just the greatest sense of purpose, which is what I hope for folks.
Thank you so much. Thank you, George, for
My
being
pleasure.
here.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for being here to BS with me today. And thanks to everyone for listening. Until the next episode, remember that everybody is different and different is good.
Hit it! That's what I'm talking about. Wait! Okay, now, from the beginning.
We hope you enjoyed the stories shared in today's episode of BS, Beyond Stereotypes. Join us next time when another authentic personality unleashes their uniqueness on the world.